Back at it, back at it, back at it. So this video is going to be why I started reading and why I think you should too. Like, I know you guys don't really care about why I started reading, but I think it helps a little bit with, you know, the whole overall theme. Before I get to anything, I can't thank you guys enough for watching the video. Absolutely love you guys. And I'll try my best to keep it relatively short, but I can't promise anything. I would love to take credit for this and be like, I decided to make a video about this, but really it's not. I feel almost compelled to make a video about this because I felt like I'm doing literature and reading a disservice. The thing that's changed my life over the last 4 months, I feel like I'm doing it a disservice if I don't tell other people to read. Like, I feel like it's that life-changing, and I'm willing to bet, like, I would bet my life on it. If you start reading and really throw yourself into it, there's no way you don't see any change in yourself. Like, I think it's that powerful. It's almost a superpower. I think reading is actually a superpower. Like, reading is an actual life changer, and I really hope after this video, God, give me the words, please, that really helps you start reading and really try and give it a chance. All right, enough of the premises though. Love you guys for watching the video, but enough of the premises. So the first thing I want to say is that, yes, there's a lot of the cliches you hear your whole life, like you'll get smarter, your vocabulary will extend, you'll be able to articulate your thoughts better. Like, these are all true things, and there's a little bit more than that. These are all true things, but you've been hearing that your whole life, so me telling you that won't get you to read. Even though they're all true, and that honestly, that should be enough to get you to read, but if it's not, I can't blame you because I didn't start reading because of that. So to start this off, I'm going to give a little bit of a backstory of why I started reading because it may help you maybe start reading. So as I said earlier, I'm very introverted and I've always been to myself, but I've always just been in love with art. And for the past 5 years, I've kind of thrown myself into it, but I never was a reader. I never started reading, which is super surprising to me because I'm such a big fan of creative expression and art in general. Like, I know so much music, a lot of like films, like plays, like anything with creative expression, I'm a huge fan of it. But I guess I just never got into reading. And I honestly couldn't tell you why, but I think I do now. And I think it's because school had made reading such a chore to me. Like, it was like I remember days where I was never some big school guy. Like, I was always smart, but I just never liked the whole getting tested on what you're learning. I didn't feel like knowledge was something you could contain. Like, I never thought learning was supposed to be something that was supposed to be tested on or chored. Like, it's supposed to be something that is growth as a human. And obviously I didn't have the words to say it like that, but that's how I've always felt. So me being up at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night trying to cram for 4:51 because I have a test tomorrow, that kind of just ruined reading for me later on. So I was already detached from reading. But I think what sparked it for me was like looking back whenever I realized like, yo, I haven't even gotten into literature and it's probably the biggest art form. It's been around the longest. Like, outside of like oral tradition, which is also another art to me, that's a whole other video in itself. Outside of oral tradition and just speech in general, I think literature is the oldest art form and I never got into it. And I was like, okay, I think I'm going to start reading. So I already had a little bit of kind of inherent drive. So I was thinking back in my childhood and seeing like my dad reading, my mom reading, and my dad reads like a lot of, he was like, the other day I saw him reading Count of Monte Cristo. When I was younger, the book that really made me think about him reading was he was reading Native Son by Richard Wright. And these are not easy books to read. Like, my dad, he's an actual genius. But when I'm thinking back in my head of like, okay, I want to start reading. So now that my mind is thinking about reading, I think about my dad reading Native Son, which is one of the harder books like in African American literature. There's Ralph Waldo Ellison, Richard Wright, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Zora Neale. There's a lot of like real dense literature out there. My dad was reading that. So that gave me another layer of like, okay, so now I have this kind of drive to read. So those were two things in the back of my head kind of driving me to read, but I still didn't pull the trigger on it. But the person that really sparked my interest for reading, there's two people actually. I saw the James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni interview. Rest in peace, Nikki Giovanni, just happened recently, rest in peace. And hearing James Baldwin speak was like, bro, like that changed it for me. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start reading. But it's like, now it's where do I start? And a bad thing about me, it could be good or bad thing. I don't really know which one it is, honestly, it depends on the day. But whenever I want to start something, I throw myself into the actual deep end. Like anything I do, I'm going to try and like do the hardest stuff first. So at this time, I've already seen some stuff on my TikTok about like more dense literature, and I saw like the Kafkas, the Morrisons, but I saw Dostoevsky, and people were talking about Dostoevsky like he was some like just this high and mighty guy. And I was like, okay, I'm starting there. So I go and pick up Notes from Running Around by Dostoevsky at Barnes & Noble and The Trial by Kafka. I got the Trial by Kafka and I got Notes from Running Around by Dostoevsky. Now, if you're a reader, you know these are two of the hardest books to read. Like, they're not the hardest, but like, for someone that hasn't read in 6 years, that's something I should not have done that. I don't know what I was thinking. But long story short, I started reading Notes from Running Around the second I got back to my house. Like, okay, I'm going to start reading. I'm going to do it now. And I couldn't get past page 3. Like, I was trying to read and I could read the words, but I wasn't comprehending anything. So I go to Starbucks later on that day to start reading. I was like, maybe it's the setting. Maybe I can't read in my room. At Starbucks, I couldn't even get past anything. Like, I was like, yo, am I not supposed to be reading stuff like this? Like, I almost like felt lesser. Like, I was like, bro, like, should I not be reading? Like, hold on, like, where do I start at? So I'm like discouraged from reading at this point. And I'm like, okay, all right, maybe I'll just stick with the stuff I like doing already. But luckily, I went to my social media and I scrolled one time and I saw Brady's Bookshelf on TikTok. And he was sitting in front of this giant bookshelf of books and he was talking about them so articulate and eloquent. And I was like, he's so passionate about this. And I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm such a fan of creative expression. Like, let's say, hypothetically, let's say someone had watched paint dry for 20 years and he's so passionate about it, and he has a TED Talk about watching paint dry. I will pay full price for that ticket to watch him talk about watching paint dry. Like, I love when people do stuff passionately. So I was watching that and I was like, bro, like, he loves this. Like, why is it not working for me? So on a whim, I text in the chat. There's probably like 300 people in this live. So I didn't think he was even gonna see it. But I was like, okay, last chance. I text in the chat and I say, where do I start reading? What book do I read? He sees it and says, oh, what's up? He said, read Picture of Dorian Gray. That was it. That's all I needed. So once I saw that, the next day I go back to Barnes & Noble's and I pick up Picture of Dorian Gray. And that's where it all started for me. So I'm reading Dorian Gray and I'm like, I'm actually understanding what's going on. I'm loving the writing style. Oscar Wilde's prose is super approachable. So it was like super flowery and I felt so a part of the story. And I got it from the classic section. So I had, you know, the term in the connotation of classic in the back of my head. I was like, okay, this is one of the best books ever. And I'm reading it and I'm seeing why. I'm seeing the Sybil and Dorian interaction. I'm seeing that whole arc. I'm seeing how Basil and Henry interact versus how Henry and Dorian interact. I'm seeing how Basil and Dorian interact. I'm seeing how Dorian interacts with everybody else in his society. Like, I'm picking up on all these things and I'm having all these connections. I'm like, yo, I'm understanding this. Long story short, I finished Dorian Gray in like 3 days. And that's not super fast, but like for someone that's never read, like I was reading, no exaggeration, probably like 5 hours out of these days. I was like really sitting down, like, I'm going to finish this. I really enjoy it, like, and I just had to finish. And I vividly remember me like reading it. I'm like getting up. I'm like, yo, oh my gosh. Like whenever Dorian and Sybil were talking, I remember like reading the book. It's right here. Matter of fact, the book is right here. Hold on. This is Dorian Gray right here. This is the same exact copy that I read. But I remember reading it and I got to the Sybil arc and I remember like I closed the book and I got up. I was like I was so enveloped into the book. And I'll never ever forget that, like that feeling I had of like, I need to find this again. So I finished Dorian Gray and now I have all of these books. Like, you guys can't really see it and I can't really move my camera. I might show it at the end. But I have so many books now because of that one book. And all it took for me was finding the right book for me to get into. Now, you guys are infinitely smarter than me. So you guys could probably start with Notes from Running Around by Dostoevsky and be perfectly fine, but I couldn't do it. And maybe classics aren't your thing. Maybe you need to find a romance, fantasy book, or mystery. There's other ways you can get into reading other ways. I'll get to that a little bit later. But all it took for me was finding the right book and the right genre to read. But yeah, now that we got that out the way, now I'm going to touch on things on why I think you should read. And the first thing I want to bring up is that it's almost like you can live different lives from your current life through other people in the books. And what I mean by that is that's what makes a great writer a great writer. It's how much they can envelop you and surround you with the world that they're trying to create in their head. It's like a certain mindset shift. Like, let's just take, because we're talking about Dorian Gray, let's talk about Oscar Wilde for a second. Like, what makes a great writer is like Oscar Wilde taking the world he has of like Dorian being this aristocrat, this young, handsome man that everyone loves, how he can put that into words somehow and make you feel enveloped in the same world he is in his head. That's what makes a great writer. That's what makes a great artist in general. So whenever you're reading certain things, if you look at it that way and you can really envelop yourself into the book, you can now live a different life because it's a different world you're living in. Let's say for another example, because Dorian is much more plot-based, and there is philosophical themes like vanity and purity and stuff like that. But let's talk about something more applicable. Like Frankenstein, Mary Shelley is one of my favorite books of all time, just because of this. Like, really think about how hard it is to capture a feeling like being alienated by society. Like that's not like an emotion like happiness or confusion where everyone feels it and it's easier to conceptualize. Like, that's not something that's really you're impressed by. But how do you capture being alienated by society that you didn't choose to be in? And when I'm reading Frankenstein, especially the 1818 text, I read the original copy, not the revised. But when reading the 1818 text, I felt like with the monster. I felt alienated from my creator that I didn't ask to be here from. And even though I don't feel that way in real life, I've now lived that life through the monster in Frankenstein. Like, another example is if like the dystopian book. So like if you read like Fahrenheit 451, 1984, what else? Parable of the Soul, Parable of the Talents. Like all the dystopian books, even the ones that are like Divergent, Hunger Games, and Handmaid's Tale. Can't forget Handmaid's Tale. But if you remove the mindset of I'm just reading a book to read the book and see what happens, and you really try and live through the book, it's so fascinating to understand that these worlds that these authors have created probably won't happen in real life. Some of them might have glimpses, but we're not going to live in a society like the Hunger Games or like the fullest extent of the Handmaid's Tale or like the fullest extent of 1984. But you will now live that life through the book. And because Margaret Atwood was such a good writer, you now know what it feels like to live in a Gilead oppressive state against women with Offglen, with Offred. Like you now know what that feels like. Because their world building and imagery was so good, I felt like I've lived that life before. And whenever people ask me what books to read, even though I'm not an expert at all, I always give them dystopians or like Siddhartha by Herman Hesse or Alchemist by Coelho, like books that they can put themselves in instantly. Like when you read the journey narratives, like Alchemist and Siddhartha, like it's so easy to put yourself in the shoes of Santiago or Siddhartha. It's written that way. Like Paulo Coelho was writing it in a way to where you can see yourself in Santiago. You can exchange personal legend, which is what Santiago's searching after. You can exchange that for whatever goal you want in life. You can exchange enlightenment, which is what Siddhartha is searching after. You can exchange that for whatever you want in life. And that's why I love reading so much, because even though I just said that those two have similarities, they're so vastly different to where, like, if you have a more philosophical brain, a more logical brain, a more rational kind of brain, you'll love Alchemist more than Siddhartha, because Santiago's pursuit of the personal legend was more philosophical than Siddhartha's was. He had more rationale in his mentality. He knew he was more strategic and analytical of how he was getting to his end goal. But if you're more spiritual and you feel more whimsical and ruminating when it comes to like, I'll find my enlightenment, you'll like Siddhartha more than Alchemist. Because Siddhartha is based on, obviously, the Buddha and how he got to enlightenment, and it's much more of a whimsical ride than it was with Santiago. I'm telling you, like, inserting yourselves into these books is like you're living different lives, and then it's a mindset shift of, let me not find what I want to read today, let me find a certain life I want to live and get a book that way. That's what makes the action and adventure books or like the mystery books, like, you can't tell me when you read Sherlock Holmes or Nancy Drew that you're not like actively trying to figure out the story beforehand. Like when you read a Nancy Drew book or a Sherlock Holmes book, before they even talk about who the killer was or who did the crime, you're doing it in your head. Like, I know you are. You can't tell me you're not. So like the fact that you're anticipating, trying to figure out like, okay, I want to put the pieces together myself. I want to do it myself. You're living through the character. And people take that for granted. That's such a beautiful thing. It's like training your mind in certain ways. And then you're adding in a whole nother layer of like, I'm living a different life right now. And it's something that's even cooler because it's like you can just come out of it's like you can live the life, come out of it with the same knowledge. You don't have to like keep it there. When you read Nancy Drew and Sherlock Holmes and you get all these analytical and strategic ways of thinking, you can come out of it with the same knowledge you just gained. Like, it's not like you just leave it with Nancy. So fascinating. Like, that's the coolest thing to me. Like, I just absolutely love it. And I should have mentioned this earlier in the video, but I thought about it in my head, maybe I wanted to, but I get emotional talking about it, so I didn't know if I wanted to put it in the vid. But I think it's beneficial and might get people to read, so let's hope I can stick with it. But my grandmother died a few months ago. One of my favorite people ever to live. I absolutely love my grandmother. But she had told my aunt in her more of like her final months living that she wanted my aunt to go be her eyes for her and like she said, go see all these places for me, go do all these things for me, and come back and tell me about it so I can live through you, because I can't do it anymore. Like, it's just, man. So that's one of the most powerful things I've ever heard in my entire life. When that was mentioned to me, because I didn't know about that until the funeral at the service, and my aunt had said that, because she's a powerful speaker, she's a poet, and my aunt had said that in her speech to everyone. I felt so, like, moved by that. And when I got back, I was already reading at this point, and I was reading before I even knew all this, like, putting yourself into the book thing. I was just reading because I loved it. I heard that, and I had a whole switch in my mindset of, like, if I really read these books and, like, really get what I need to get out of them, get these stories, get these themes and all these ideologies I can pull from these books, I could tell it to someone else, and it's like they did it as well. If I can really work on my articulation skills and getting these concepts and conceptualizing them into, like, coherent thoughts, if I can do that for someone else, I can be a middleman to some story or some life they want to live. So reading not only helps you understand these themes and live these lives, you can live these lives and give it to someone else so they can live it as well. If they don't want to read the book, that's fine. You can, and you can give it to them. It's just so powerful. It's a superpower, I'm telling you. And then that's like, that brings us off into more of like nonfiction too. I've been talking more about fiction in this book or in this video, but in nonfiction, like if I read something about like, we can bring it down to the most surface level, and it's something you do on a daily basis. Like let's say your friend wants to, like your friend has a headache or a cold or something, and they're being lazy and don't want to look it up. You can look up like how to get over a cold remedies. You read something, you articulate it to them, and you tell them what you just read. That's something you do every day. That's bare bones of it. But now you can take it to a different level and really expand that mentality. And what if you read something like something super complex like The Will to Power or Republic by Plato or any of Plato's work? Plato is legendary. Like you can read the Machiavelli's The Prince, and you can tell a leader that, let's say a leader's worked up to this leadership position and he needs some advice when it comes to leadership. Since you've read The Prince of Machiavelli, which is the best commentary on leadership of all time, you've read that, you can now be a middleman and helpful to somebody else. You now become like a very valuable asset because you've done something that he hasn't done. And I'm not saying that like you're better than him or anything. I'm just saying you've done something. You've gone out your way to live a different life and garner something from a book that you've read, and you've put yourself into the book enough to where you can articulate it to someone else. You're much more powerful that way. That's one of my biggest goals. I want to read so much to where like I have something to say to everyone if they need me in any kind of situation. And this is a brief segue. Now, it still kind of touches with the same topic, but this is something else as well. So, since I've been reading, I've been so much more compassionate and I've felt so much more empathy. And now, I don't know if there's a study about this online. There probably is. I know I'm not the first one to think this. But I felt so much more compassionate to everyone around me because of what I've been reading. Like, I take a lot of sad media, even when it comes to, like, movies, like, I watch a lot of sad movies, listen to a lot of sad music, but I just think that feels emotionally driven, and I just really enjoy it. Like, I promise I'm okay. I say all that to say, like, when I read The Bell Jar for the first time by Sylvia Plath, favorite book of all time, by the way, I absolutely love it, but when I read that for the first time, I couldn't pick up another book for another week, and, like, I was so sensitive outside to other people that, like, it was almost scaring me. Because the whole premise of The Bell Jar is that when Sylvia, or not Sylvia, well, even though it's semi-autobiographical, so it is Sylvia, but when Esther in the book was really suffering with depression and literally did not want to be on Earth anymore, but Esther in the book, the whole thing about it is that she doesn't verbally tell anyone, I'm struggling, help me, really. Like, it's never that obvious. So it was on the people around her to notice that she's not okay. And ultimately, no one helps her the way she needs to be helped. Which is why it gets so bad for her. And it's super sad to read because, like, we're in the mind of Esther. So, like, whenever we're hearing her thoughts, it's like, yo, no one's helping me. And, like, I'm trying to show myself, like, I'm trying to really show people, like, I'm not okay and no one's seeing it. No one's giving me the help I need. So after I read that, I think I was on a train the next day. And I was, like, looking around, like, seeing other people, like, I'm feeling so sensitive. And now every single time I see someone even give off anything remotely sad about them, if they're feeling down, like I'm like, are you, like I feel like obliged to say, are you okay? Like I'm nervous about it. But I'm only feeling that way because I read this 300-page book about a girl that's suffering so bad she doesn't want to be on Earth anymore, but no one's helping her around her. And the fact that I had that knowledge, I came out of that book and took it into my life and was saying, yo, like I need to help people now. And we can go even deeper with Sylvia. Like when I read her poems, her journals, like it only increased the sensitivity because you really see like Sylvia, she didn't want to give power to the depression that she was feeling, so she would never really address it, and she would never tell anyone plainly what she was feeling because she felt like she would be giving it power. So now every time I see anyone that I even like have a sense of them feeling down, I'm like, yo, are you okay? Like I feel so obliged to do that. Like your compassion will go up so much from reading. It's insane. It's not even just like depression or spiraling. Like if you read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, I read that, and after reading how Bucola like felt inadequate in her own society, which is different than depression. There's a lot of different like gray lines when it comes to just sadder topics. But when it comes to Bucola, she felt inadequate in her society, and at the end of the book, she literally goes crazy because of it. Like she starts doing crazy stuff because of it. So now when I see people outside, I'm trying to do all I can to help them like not feel like secluded from their own society. So after reading, you'll start being more compassionate. You'll start being more helpful to people. You'll start being more kind because you know what could happen if you don't. You've read Bluest Eye, so you know Bucola, like she's feeling inadequate and she goes crazy because of it. Or whenever you see someone feeling depressed, you've read Beljar, you know what happens. Like you know what happens if you don't. Once again, it's like living a whole life. Like you've lived the entire life of Esther Greenwood, or like you lived the entire life of Bucola, that you know what happens at the end. This is kind of a brief tangent, but like, you know when people talk about religion, they talk about God being outside of time and space? Riding on that kind of logic, if a great writer who's very good at painting or building a world writes a whole world in an entire book, and you read it, it's like you are outside of the time and space of that book. Meaning you know the end, you know how it ends. So if you see someone feeling the same way Esther Greenwood was in the beginning of the Bell Jar, if you don't help her the way people didn't help her in the book, you know how it ends for Esther. Like, do you see what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm articulating that the right way, but it's so powerful to think about it like that. Like, it gives you so much power and, like, almost insight on people. And I'm not saying to be like those psychologists, that people that try and do, like, oh, I know how you are. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying, like, if you read, you'll start picking up on things like other people would not. And I'm telling you, when you start reading, you'll see it. It's beautiful stuff. Hold on, bro. Need a little bit of break. I got a little passion right there. But alright, another thing I want to touch on, I'm kind of done with that. I might come back to it a little bit later. But another thing I want to touch on is the difference between other art forms and reading. Because I've heard a lot of people say, like, I don't have the attention span. So I do understand the attention span. Reading is much more strenuous. Not strenuous. It's much more work-inducing. You gotta, like, really try to read. But the reason why because I don't own a TV anymore. Once I started reading, I put my TV in my closet. But once I started reading, I really realized why it's so much different than other art forms. Not trying to belittle or discredit movies or films or anything. I absolutely love them as well. I can talk about them just as much as I can talk about books. But that is someone else's depiction of what they read or what they experienced. It's like you're getting a secondary source. Like whenever you watch movies that have depictions, like whenever you watch No Country for Old Men or The Hobbit, or like any movie rendition of a book, which, let's be honest, most of them are. That's someone else's interpretation of the book they read, and they put it on screen. But when you start reading and really put yourself into the book you're reading, you create that picture yourself. So here's a little thought experiment. Like, let's say they put me and you, whoever's watching this video, they put me and you in two separate rooms, and they have like some device to our heads and connected to this TV that will, whatever we read, it depicts it perfectly onto the screen. And they give us both the same translation, the same exact book, the same exact words. You understand? Even with down to the T, every I dotted, every T crossed, the same exact words, same exact translation, our picture on the screen will look completely different. Because we've lived completely different lives. Like whenever we both read, the car was parked outside the house, I'm going to see probably a house that I've seen in real life, or a different car. Maybe I would see my dream car, but you would see your dream car, or it's a house that you've seen in your life. And it gets even deeper than that. We can almost get to the point where it's like the author writes brown eyes, black hair, 6'2", drives this car, like super in depth. No matter how in depth you go, our pictures will look completely different. And I say all that to say, a movie is someone else's rendition of what they've experienced or what they read. But whenever you read, you create a completely unique depiction of what you read than someone else. No one on this planet, if we read the same exact book, let me get a random book. Like if me and you both read Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, It doesn't matter how in depth JD was reading or writing this book, our depiction of what the character looks like, how the world is around them, like it would all be so vastly different no matter how in depth the writing was. And to me, that's what separates movies from books, because whenever you watch a movie or a TV show, you're getting the same exact depiction or portrayal that everyone else is. Which that can be a good thing if you want to look at it that way. It makes it more relatable. Like you talk about other people and have the same exact reference point. Like I see all the benefits. But if you look at it on the other side, it creates more intelligent and thought-provoking conversations when you read, because you and someone else's depictions or portrayals are so vastly different to where you can create some, it makes the world even bigger. Because if two people watch a movie, the same exact movie, yeah, it's possible to find some different stuff in it and get different takeaways. But it's not as evident as when you read, because nothing you read will be portrayed the same way in both of your minds. But when you watch the same show, it's going to be the same exact picture in both of their heads. The themes and takeaways could be different from the movie, but the vision you see in your head is the same exact vision. But when you read, the themes and takeaways could be different as well, but so could also the visuals. Like, whenever you read something, you have this world in your head that you're creating in your head, and it's like, it's just so beautiful to think about that. Like, it just expands the world even more. Like, hold on, I'm in a Bible study with my friend Matthew. Now, he said something super powerful that kind of rides the same line. Like, whenever we're reading the Bible, it's like 8 or 10 of us in the Bible study, and he was saying if everyone's reading the same exact thing, he encourages everyone to speak about it, because whenever you read the scriptures, we could have 8 different takeaways from it. So it's like you read it 8 times, and that was big for me too. It was like, okay, like, if I have a book club with someone, which made me start my own book club, it's in the bio about if you want to join a book club. But there's like 400 people in the book club. And like, I was thinking one day, I was like, if we all read the same book with these vastly different portrayals in our heads, and we all talk about it, it's like, I'm reading it so many times, to the point where I could tell someone else about it and have different takeaways from it that I didn't even have when I read it. Like, reading is just, it's absolutely beautiful. And it's like, I've never seen anything like this. Like, I'm telling you, I think I told you earlier in the video, but I've thrown myself into art for the past 5 years so much to where I could like rattle off music and albums and artists and time periods and Renaissance art history. I can films, directors. I could rattle off all this stuff, but I've never seen anything like literature in my entire life. And like, I don't even read, like I read a lot of classics when I do read narratives and stories, but I read a lot of philosophy as well. And like, I read that because really the same exact thing. And this is a whole other topic, but I'm really just seeking, I want to just have a lot of knowledge and seek as much as I can while I'm on earth. And reading people from these time periods that are just so infinitely smarter than me makes it to where like, I have almost like an artifact. Which leads me to another point which I want to touch on, is like, reading's almost a form of time travel. Like, I truly think you're actually transporting yourself from time periods when you're reading, especially certain stuff. Like, when you think about Plato or Aristotle, who didn't have people to read before them, they had people to read, but not really, to be honest with you. Like, all of their philosophy and all of what they're thinking came from this inherent will to learn and to know what's going on in the world around them. Like, they're like the first line of thinkers. Like, they probably sat outside in nature one day, sat on a rock, looked at the sky and was like, is God real? And had these whole like 500-page scrolls of like really trying to break it down and like almost going crazy over it. And the fact that that's been preserved, it's mind-blowing to me. You understand that this book was written in 370 BC? The Republic by Plato was written in 370 BC. I have it in my hand right now. Like, when I read this for the first time, I think after I read it, I had a whole like epiphany of like, what did I just read? The person's thoughts from this book are thousands of years old. He's walking the earth where nothing, it was like a barren land. They were living in like I'm reading something that's so fascinating, and it's because it's so old. And like these thoughts he has, the fact that it still applies today, because a lot of Plato's stuff was more like human-based. Aristotle was more math-based, so his stuff kind of aged. But Plato was much more thought, human, condition-based. And when you read Plato's stuff, even though it's that old, it's like a form of time travel, because you're now reading it thousands of years later and getting the same thing they're getting from it back then. Like, the Bridge of Stillness Ray won the Pulitzer Prize in 1929. So people reading it in that time period thought this book was amazing. But do you think they would have thought almost 100 years later, like, oh yeah, the people are still gonna be reading this book? I finished Bridge of Stanley Was Frayed like a month or so ago, and when I finished reading it, I was like, yo, I just had the same feeling that someone had 100 years ago reading this book. Like, dude, it's insane to me. It's like you're time traveling different time periods. Like, whenever you read Campaigns of Alexander that has literal, like, written scrolls and text in it, at least in the Penguin edition, it has, like, text in it from so long ago that you're, like, reading the campaigns like you're someone that read it back in the time period of Alexander the Great. Whenever you read, like, the, like, Leo Tolstoy's wife's diaries, you're, like, it's like you're, like, married to Leo Tolstoy and you're reading it as if, like, that's your husband, because it's so fascinating. It's, like, literally time travel. And I kind of started super high with time travel, but even on a lower scale, it's like a form of international travel. Like, I can read something that was written 20 years ago in Brazil somewhere, and I can read it in America like he was my next door neighbor. And that's all art. That's not even just reading. That's just all art in general. Like, I absolutely love it. And I don't understand why this is not like a thing that's almost mandatory. Honestly, I think everyone should do this. Like, I'm just so fascinated with stories. And I want to be a creative director whenever I get my ultimate goal. That's my ultimate goal in life. And the fact that for the last 5 years, I've thrown myself into so much art when it comes to reading, movies, all the art stuff. I have so much to pull from in my job to where I can create some, like, actual worlds myself. I've now pulled from so much stuff that it's like, okay, like, I can make my own world now. Like, a quick example, I work with an artist named Gavin. I work with an artist in New Jersey right now. He came to me like, I know you're, like, want to do creative directing. Do you have any ideas for me? And I asked him what kind of like virtues or theme do you want for the album? And he said purity and, like, keeping purity and, like, vanity. But the thing is, if I hadn't read Dorian Gray, I really wouldn't know what to say. I would have gave him some surface level idea. But when he asked me that, it sparked in my head that I've read a book that's 400 pages about that same exact topic. So I tell him the entire story of Dorian Gray, and it sparks in a whole thought out project in his mind of 12 songs, 12 videos, and it's now a whole spiral of, like, a Dorian Gray themed album. Like, that's so powerful. You understand how powerful that was? And I can do that for other people when it comes to, like, that's the job. I want to have that job so where, like, I can pull from all this art that I've been doing and give it to other people for whatever they want to create. Like, just art's the same as energy. It's something that can only be converted. It never stops anywhere. So whenever I pull from something and give it to someone else, it doesn't stop with them. Because let's say Gavin makes that album about Dorian Gray, other people hear it, now they're inspired by the same thing, and it keeps going. Superpower. I'm trying to tell you, superpower. Like, over the past 4 months, I've seen such a drastic change in just who I've been. I'm finding myself much easier because I'm living lives through these books, and I'm pulling so many stories from all this art to where it's like I see stuff in myself that I never saw before. Like, once again, I'm super introverted, I'm super to myself, but I'm not able to speak for almost an hour long. Like, these before I edit these videos, they're like an hour and a half uncut, like, raw footage. And that's just so inspiring to me. Even though I'm the one inspiring myself, which is crazy, but, like, it's so inspiring to me because whenever I'm in my daily life, I don't say more than 100 words a week. I don't leave my room. It's just like I'm just always surrounded by, like, my whole room is all these posters. There's posters on the entire wall of my room is all posters. I have so many books. Like, there's a bunch of stuff. I just sit in my room all day. I never thought in my entire life that I would be able to speak for this long about a certain topic because I've always been so reserved. But now that I'm reading, I found something that I can talk about, and I feel almost obliged and, like, compelled to tell you guys to, like, it's a superpower that it can harness time travel, can harness international travel from the comforts of your room. It's insanity, man. And all it takes is one book, finding what you like to read. So, like, I'm gonna end it with this whole other segment of we're no longer in high school to where you have to try and cram to read before Friday's test, or, like, it's super stressful every single day in class where, like, you just finished math class, now you gotta go to this reading class and read for the whole period. Like, that's not a thing anymore. You can now read for fun. Find a life you want to live. Go read it through the book and tell someone else about it. So be the eyes for them. Find some historical figure you like. Like, there's biographies, autobiographies, diaries, memoirs, self-written memoirs, all kind of crazy stuff. So, like, let's say you like Napoleon or Alexander the Great, Aaliyah, Kanye, some historical figure that say you like. Go pick up a biography or autobiography about them. Just start there. Start reading something, because once you read anything, it's not even just stories. If you read a blog one day, it's easier for you to read the next day. So if you read some autobiography about someone you enjoy, the next time you want to pick up a story, it's going to be easier for you. And there's also like kind of sidebars. Like if you like the Huckleberry Finn movie, there's a book called James that just came out that's like interpolating Huckleberry Finn, I'm pretty sure, or Tom Sawyer, one of the two. But you can read James because you know the story already. So it's easy for you to get into that. Or like my favorite Bible story ever is Abraham and Isaac. And Soren Kierkegaard wrote a whole like branch off of that story, and it's called Fear and Trembling. I finished it the other day, but it was very good, and it was like a retelling of the story, just more philosophical and more in depth. And then it's much easier to branch off because everyone that writes books reads books. So like whenever you read the Iliad, Simone Weil, I think it's Weil or Wheel. Simone Weil wrote War and Iliad, which takes the Iliad and turns it into like a pacifist philosophy work. Like there's ways to spin off of it. Like whenever you read The Stranger by Albert Camus, if you really like absurdism, the philosophy that he portrayed in that book, Myth of Sisyphus came out 2 years later. You can pick that up the next day and read that. It's a branch off of The Stranger. Like there's ways to go about it. And I'm big on combining art forms. So whenever you read something that you really enjoy, if it has a movie adaptation, if you watch it immediately after. Like if you like Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, watch 1992 Of Mice and Men movie immediately after. Or interchangeable. Watch the movie then read the book. There's ways to go about it, I'm telling you. Like if you like the Caravaggio's David and Goliath painting, you can look at this painting and really enjoy it and be like, I want to know the story now. Go to 1 Samuel in the Bible and read David and Goliath's story. Like if you like Evermore and Folklore by Taylor Swift, the albums, read Rebecca because Rebecca influenced Taylor Swift to make the albums. Like there's art is all interconnected. It's everything connects. Like I'm huge on interconnectedness, and I think everything's connected, especially art. And I want to make a video in the future just talking about art in general because like there's so many ways we can go about that itself. But I say all that to say, reading will absolutely change your life. It's definitely changed mine. I just think it's an asset people don't take advantage of. And every time I see like a bookstore near me like go out of business, or like a thrift store is removing their book section because no one buys them, like it kind of hurts, honestly. I'm like, yo, you guys don't understand. This is something that's like, this is just next level stuff. I don't know if I have any more to say. I probably will down in the future. I mean, I might make another video like this. I don't know, maybe. I don't know, but I don't know what to say. I absolutely love you guys for watching this video. Hopefully you like take something out of this. Take whatever you can and leave the rest. I'm not saying just take everything I say with a grain of salt. I am not an expert, but I absolutely love you guys for watching this video. I cannot thank you guys enough. But thanks for watching this video. Hopefully you can get something out of it. But be blessed today and never read something today. Today's the day to start.